all and welcome to Chalk Talk, your source for Ohio State varsity athletics news, updates, and analysis. I'm your host, Kaley Rentz, coming to you from the Lantern TV studios in Columbus, Ohio. I'm joined by senior Lantern reporter Andrew Todd Smith and Lantern TV's assistant sports director Aaron Urian. Guys, how's it going?
Incredible.
Great, thank you.
Well, even though the football team was in its bye week this past week, they've had a really intense last two weeks just kind of preparing for Rutgers. So Rutgers is 5-1 on their season, and they're 1-1 in the Big Ten. So guys, what are we looking forward to during this game?
Well, to start off, last week we mentioned some upsets on the show. Again, last weekend there were two notable teams, Texas A&M and Arizona, who were ranked ahead of Ohio State, who ended up losing. So Ohio State moves up to number 13. This weekend, there's a couple other really big showdowns, including a Notre Dame-Florida State competition, which is definitely going to shake up the rankings. Also, towards the end of the season, we have the Egg Bowl between Ole Miss and Mississippi State, and we also have the Iron Bowl between Alabama and Auburn, which is guaranteed to move the Buckeyes up at some point, as long as they keep winning the way they have been this last month.
Definitely. You know, as you said, Aaron, there's a big matchup, you know, number 2 versus number 5, Florida State, Notre Dame. Opportunity for the losing team to really drop out there if the victor, you know, makes a statement. And as you said, you know, the end of the season, that SEC West is stacked with title and playoff contenders. So definitely things to keep our eyes on as analysts of the Buckeye team as they progress through the Big Ten slate. But to answer your question, Kaley, you know, Rutgers, I think they're impressing people in their first year. You know, 1-1, tough, close, hard-fought loss to Penn State, 13-10. You know, sort of a defensive slugfest. They haven't given up more than 38 points this season. So I mean, it bodes well in terms of being a challenging matchup, making this Buckeye team continue to grow. What are you sort of expecting from the Rutgers team when they come to town, Aaron?
Well, more so on the offensive side, when you look at passing efficiency, Ohio State and Rutgers are ranked 2nd and 4th. Gary Nova, he's kind of inconsistent a little bit. Passed for over 1,600 yards this season, thrown 13 touchdowns, but he's been sacked 8 times and also thrown 7 interceptions. They had the tough loss against Penn State, which you mentioned, but he also had a really good game against that team from up north. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on Saturday, especially considering the temperatures are starting to drop now and the wind is starting to pick up. On Saturday, it's supposed to be 16-mile-an-hour winds close to game time, so it'll be interesting to see how that affects the kicking game, Ohio State's passing game, because J.T. Barrett is a highly efficient passer as well, and also how it's going to affect Gary Nova. So we could be seeing quite the running game and classic Big Ten style smash mouth football, if you will.
Obviously, we mentioned both teams coming off a bye, so plenty of time to prepare. Rutgers, I kind of alluded to it earlier, you know, they're making a splash in their first Big Ten campaign. Maryland was just as motivated to come out strong, and I think Rutgers, with this opportunity to come into Columbus in front of a national audience, they'll be motivated. Nova, a star player. He's got sophomore wide receiver Janarian Grant, a key part of their return game. They're averaging 20 to 21 yards on kickoff returns, and Aaron, you were able to talk to some of the coaches and players specifically about the special teams game, sort of how they're going to, you know, you talked about the possibly inclement weather conditions and how they're strategically kicking off depending on, because they had Stephon Diggs in Maryland, you know, we saw them kind of evolve. Kyle Clinton, you know, kicking off out of bounds and then in the middle of the end zone, through the end zone, and not really giving Diggs a chance to return it. So that's definitely something to watch for, especially what you talked about with the weather. But let's talk more about the defensive line, offensive line matchup, because Gary Nova, we've spoken his praises, but what are we to expect from, you know, an Ohio State team that's gotten 12 sacks, but you mentioned Nova's only been sacked 8. So what are we expecting to see there?
Well, Andrew, one of the most important things to note is Ohio State is yet again facing a different style of offense. This time, it's more of a balanced pro-style offense that the new offensive coordinator, Ralph Friedgen, brought to Rutgers, who was a Maryland alum, Maryland player, coached throughout the ACC, brought Maryland to precedence, and then was replaced at Maryland, but he's now back into coaching. Another thing to note when it comes to the offensive line is their left tackle, and this is something Michael Bennett talked about on Wednesday. Keith Lumpkin, their left tackle, 6'8", 315 pounds. So Gary Nova has been sacked 8 times, it's going to be kind of a challenge for the defensive ends to get around that guy to put pressure on Nova. With Joey Bosa and a little bit even with Steve Miller, they're up to the challenge. Even if Rutgers attempts to establish the passing game first, or if they try to run through or around the offensive line.
People don't understand how well we're doing at stopping the run, because we had that 300-something yard game against Navy, and then since then we've, I think, had like every team's average 70 yards. So I think we need to keep solidifying that we stop the run, and then we need to keep getting after the quarterback, because now we're starting to get into teams that aren't going to quick throw it and draw and screen all the time. So I think we're going to have more of a chance to prove who we are. I think they run the ball pretty well. They got a really big front. Their left tackle, I know, is a giant. So I think they run the ball. They're going to be some big bodies, so we have to play, make them stop running the ball. We have to stop the run early so they can drop back pass.
If you remember the first half against Maryland, we held them about 100 and some yards, well below their average, and then we gave up a couple. So we're going to be very aggressive, and you got to get this quarterback down, because he's playing the best he's ever played right now.
I can count like 4 or 5 backs we got that can do that, but you know what I'm saying, if my number's called down there, I'm definitely trying to find the end zone. I'm just red zone, you know, the usual red zone, goal line, all that type of stuff. I'm really just trying to basically be on top of our whole game, as far as like running game, pass game, just trying to be on top of everything.
So after having heard some feedback from the team there, of course, Rod Smith, the key contributor on special teams, we kind of covered his contributions earlier in the year as a experienced veteran on this Buckeye team, but not necessarily somebody that's always going to be on the highlight reel. But he has come up big for the Buckeyes as sort of the third down change of pace back behind the clear starter Ezekiel Elliott. And I think that sort of is something, a model that the Buckeyes can continue, if they can continue to follow it, then they should enjoy continued success in their Big Ten play. They did it at Maryland. They established the run early. That's the key. If they can get the job done in the red zone and not turn the ball over, Rutgers is a good squad. They are going to come in here. Kyle Flood will have them ready. But I don't see the Buckeye sort of continuum of growth and development falling off the wagon all of a sudden this week.
Well, with all that in mind, what are you guys' predictions for the game this weekend?
I'm going first this time.
Okay, go for it.
I think I finally have it dialed in. I've come up with some weird, wacky predictions with the Magic 8 Ball, but I think Ohio State maintains the 3-touchdown cushion that they've had for most of the season when it comes to victory. I'm saying 49-28 Ohio State.
Okay, solid. I do agree. I mean, based on what I just was talking about, I don't think Ohio State's offense is going to struggle particularly against the Scarlet Knights. I do think they can break the 50-point mark again, as we were talking about with Maryland, of course, in College Park. So another thing just kind of to keep in mind, both these teams have played Navy and done a decent job of not only coming out on top, but containing the triple option. So that's what I'm going to be interested to see in terms of Rutgers trying to defend Ezekiel Elliott and his versatility. So to get back to your question, I'm going 52-35. I think Rutgers, I've got faith in Nova to come into Columbus and really perform on game day. So we'll have obviously the analysis of the game and how Aaron's and my predictions pan out.
Aaron, let's move on to volleyball. How did the women's volleyball team do this week?
After knocking off the 24th ranked Wildcats, the Ohio State women's volleyball team improved to 13-5 on the season and 4-2 in conference, as well as moving into the number 22 slot for rankings, the first time so far this season they've been ranked. In the 3-1 win over Northwestern, the Buckeyes had 5 service aces. Taylor Sandboat the end of the night with 16 kills, and libero Valeria Leon had 19 digs. Check out what Coach Carlston had to say following the win.
It's the ebb and flow of the season. We lost to Minnesota in 5 on the road, you know, and we lost to a pretty good Illinois State team, 16-14. I think they're 33rd or something in the country right now. So, you know, it's really about our group. I've really loved how we've been resilient and battled, and it's nice to have it pay off. I thought tonight was an interesting match. I don't think either team played particularly well. But those are the matches that are really important, that you got to win those, especially at home. This was a match we needed.
Up next, the Buckeyes take the show on the road and head out west to Indiana. This weekend, they will face Indiana and Purdue before heading back to St. John and Rita yet again to face Michigan and Michigan State next week. Well, we're going to go ahead and move on to the world of women's field hockey. Andrew, what did you see this weekend?
Well, the women's field hockey team split their action this weekend with a road loss in Piscataway, New Jersey to the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, but they returned home and were able to beat the Kent State Golden Flashes by a final score of 3-1. They lost on the road to Rutgers despite the efforts of Maddy Humphrey and Emma Royce. Humphrey scored a goal and notched an assist on Emma Royce's goal. So upon their return home, the Buckeyes outshot the Golden Flashes overwhelmingly, 24 shots to 7, and Ohio State also had the penalty corner advantage 15-4. So it was a very aggressive and possessive game for the Buckeyes. When I talked to Coach Wilkinson after the game, she said that Annabelle Sams is the most remarkable player in terms of who she thinks has been stepping up most lately, although Humphrey getting it done from the penalty corner service spot, and Emma Royce and Peanut Johnson also contributing to the Buckeyes' success. And Maddy Humphrey, in light of the success she's been enjoying recently, had this insight to contribute after the victory against Kent State.
They were a good team, and we just had to match up and play hard and play together and just play simple hockey. We just had to work harder because we knew that they were coming. They were getting the mentality of like, okay, we got this, we scored, but we just had to shut that down and just keep on shooting. That's why we were getting more penalty corners. Yeah, we're just really focusing on the Big Ten right now. We really want to make it to the tournament, and we know we can compete with them. It's just about finishing. We just got to finish on our opportunities.
So as we heard there from Maddy Humphrey, the team needs to be able to finish and focus. She talked about the mindset coming off that huge upset of Virginia that we referenced last week, and that they need to continue to pursue that going into these games. As the Big Ten schedule continues for the Buckeyes, they're, of course, still winless in the conference, 5-8 overall record. And, of course, Ms. Humphrey addressed the team's ambitions to reach the Big Ten tournament and have a successful, sort of concluding arc to their story this season. They will be taking on ranked teams next. They will be on the road at number 18 Indiana in Bloomington, and then they will be hosting the number 12 Iowa Hawkeyes this coming Sunday.
The women's soccer team played against Maryland this weekend in a Big Ten matchup. It was a really quiet first 30 minutes, but in the 43rd minute, Ohio State did take the lead 1-0 off Nichelle Prince. Really happy to have her back in the lineup. But Maryland was able to tie it in the 50th minute of that game. Ohio State did outshoot the Terrapins 11-6. Unfortunate for Ohio State, really unable to capitalize on Maryland, so they're going to go ahead and take the tie. But they're going to be going to Michigan this weekend, playing Michigan State in East Lansing, and then playing Michigan in Ann Arbor.
And that's consistent with what we heard from Coach Lori Walker the previous week, saying that the goals will come for Nichelle Prince. So good to see her get on the board. Let's move on to men's soccer. Both you and I were in attendance at the game. What was your main takeaway? Obviously, it was a 2-1 defeat to the Indiana Hoosiers. You had the vantage point from the press box, and I was on the sideline, so I'm interested to have a conversation about what we each observed.
Yeah, so I guess coming and taking on the number 5 ranked Indiana Hoosiers, coming off of playing, 2 other ranked teams previously this season where they played Louisville and then they also played Michigan State. They got a little bit of a blip against Oakland, but unfortunately with the Hoosiers, they weren't able to get that win. But, they had a really solid first half, I thought. No team really had possession, although I did think the Buckeyes controlled the pace of the game, but possession of the ball was just kind of sporadic. No one really held on to it. Second half, all Indiana. Yeah. It was all the Hoosiers. I mean, and Ohio State, knew that. They spoke about that afterwards. Indiana did score, but the Buckeyes came back with 2 penalty kicks off of Kyle Culbertson, who was a huge asset to that game. Culbertson taking the ball away multiple times, scored in his first one, missed his second one.
The momentum swing late in that game, it was crazy. You could, hear the crowd kind of get a little reserved, but then excited again. Yeah, so as you said, Culbertson taking the PK, Indiana not happy with the calls that led to either one, but of course the second one would have tied the game, and you have to question whether Culbertson was the guy who was the best fit to take a kick when he'd already matched up against that goalie. He'd gone one way. You have to think, is it going to be easier to defend? But as you said, Indiana, they were resilient. It had to be a heartbreaker for Ivanov. It kind of trickles in off the goalpost. But I agree that Indiana was in control the second half. It seemed like Saris and Mason, these stalwarts of the team that are normally in control, they were getting dispossessed. I felt like the crossing strategy wasn't really working because Indiana defended so well.
I completely agree. I think Indiana defended greatly, and Ohio State, I mean, their defense is usually always so strong. I just thought Liam Doyle and Alex Ivanoff, they took these big, huge punts to Danny Jensen, who sits at 5'8", against 6-foot Indiana players. You're setting him up for failure. And I mean, even Yanni Saris, he's got an inch on Jensen at 5'9", but same size. You know, they're both around 150 pounds. These guys are not going to be that, just at an advantage against these 6-foot players. So, you know, Danny Jensen unable to get most of the balls that were kicked to him. So that's something where that's midfield possession. And I get why they weren't doing it. You know, Indiana was taking control of that game, but that's something where you got to push it out wide, give it to Culbertson, really just set outside, and it's going to be better.
Normally, they're so defensively stout, they can kind of ride that to success. But they'll be on the road as well this weekend, correct?
Yep, they're going to be on the road against the Wisconsin Badgers. So, you know, still some more Big Ten play. This is where Ohio State really has to hone in. They have to win these games if they want to make it to the tournament. So, you know, that's just something where Ohio State's going to have to really take this loss. You know, it's definitely disappointed and definitely something that they're just going to have to fight through, but they will be taking on the Badgers in Wisconsin. So it'll be a cold game.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
but they will definitely be ready.
Because we talked about weather maybe affecting the Ohio State football game. Well, it might affect the soccer team as well. 4-5-3 record as they go up to Madison.
Well, looking onto the ice, the Ohio State men's ice hockey team played this weekend, and they played Providence, number 3 ranked Providence, and I was extremely impressed. I mean, these Buckeyes played amazing. This was better than I saw them play last year, and I was very impressed. So on Friday, they won against Providence 5-4 in overtime, and unfortunately on Saturday they did lose, but they lost 2-1 in overtime again to the number 3 ranked team in the country, well, the then number 3 ranked team in the country. So amazing. Anthony Greco came in first game with a hat trick, 3 goals. Tanner Fritz right behind him with 2 goals. And Fritz, the captain for the team, so just huge, great play by him. Anthony Greco, you know, he changed his number to 44. He was 14 last year, so bigger number. I'm going to say bigger personality. He came out, he did it. He just did a phenomenal job. He had a huge presence on the ice. The penalty kill, power play, absolutely phenomenal. You know, it was tremendous done by them. But the up and down ride into the 2-1 on Saturday, both teams made this huge jump to become defensive powerhouses. And it was absolutely amazing to see them play like that because, you know, Sam Jardine, obviously leading his defense with assistant captain this year, came in and he told, you know, he said in the press conference, he said, you know, defense was a huge kind of like mark for their game this time. And they did. They had, each player had more block shots. Justin De Silva had four block shots. Sam Jardine had 3. So that's huge having players have block shots. I mean, that's close to what we saw goalie Matt Tompkins have, and a little bit about the goalies. Christian Fry playing Friday, and then Matt Tompkins playing Saturday. So they split the time.
It bears mentioning that you said the sort of player mindset or mentality, whatever you want to call it, was kind of dejected after that 2-1 loss, and they should be able to hang their heads high. You know, Coach Rollick has to be happy with his team's performance against such a stout opponent, but it's reflective of Tanner Fritz's and Sam Jardine's attitude during those media days because they were setting their sights high, you know, make a return to the Big Ten championship at the end of the year, and, you know, to have lost in such heartbreaking fashion to Wisconsin. I do like the move to try out both goalies, even when such a big game, you know, a big series is on the line. You know, they're not messing around with, oh, we'll tinker during exhibition play. They're making moves to figure out who needs to be on the ice for the Buckeyes and who's going to benefit them most moving forward. So I think it's interesting to think where that locker room, where their sort of attitude is going to be when they move forward, because they're ranked now, number 17 in the country. So clearly the critics and the analysts, you know, are rating their performance higher than the players themselves. But I guess that's what you want to expect from an athlete, is to always, you know, strive for self-improvement. But
I would think so. But even, you know, the coach of Providence, he said in the press conference on Friday, he said, you know, I think that Ohio State's a really good hockey team. And he said, you know, this team's going to surprise a lot of people this year. Matt Tompkins is your starting goalie, in my opinion, just for the Buckeyes, you know, with Coach Rollick. And that's something that I'd love to ask him, you know, how do you determine that? Because obviously I've never been an ice hockey coach, played, you know, been around the game, but I want to know because, I mean, Matt Tompkins, 27 saves on 29 shots. He played so well. You know, he's really he sets up the team. And I guess, you know, similar to what Aaron said last year about quarterbacks in football, when you have 2, you don't really have a starting one.
Right.
And I think right now we got 2 goalies that are pretty evenly matched, although Christian Fry did get 4 goals scored on him and Matt Tompkins only had 2.
Right.
And even in the exhibition game against Guelph University, Matt Tompkins didn't see a goal. He played second half. No goals were scored on him. So that's something where I have to give it to Matt Tompkins. But you know what? We'll have to see what happens. They're going to be playing Miami University this weekend, and they're going to split the series. So it's going to go home on Friday. So Ohio State students, go out to the Schottenstein Arena on Friday. 7 p.m. is when the game starts. And then they're going to be traveling to Miami on Saturday for the next game. So we'll have to see how they fare off against the
Red Hawks.
Yeah, who's always a tough team to beat, always tough.
Definitely.
But looking into women's hockey, they lost 2 rounds to the #2 Wisconsin Badgers, 6-0 and 3-0. So better the second day, 3-0. But Cassidy Sauvé saw action in the game. She had 44 saves on Saturday.
Yeah, but
that's amazing.
Definitely. Yeah, both these teams clearly not shying away from tough competition. You have to give it to them. Obviously, the men enjoying a little more success early on, but I mean, these teams are asking a lot of their players early. Between exhibition play and kind of running through those rosters and seeing who's a good fit. But as we talked about with the men and with the women facing the #2 team in the country, I mean, if you're going to give up 9 goals, you would hope that that's an experience that is going to mature your young players and, have the upperclassmen kind of step up and be like, this is the standard. This is the level that we need to be playing at. And I would argue that, Coach Nate Handrahan would probably prefer a loss, a pair of losses like this to come earlier in the season, so there's actually a lesson to be learned, and it's not just heartbreak with no sort of takeaway. Women take on Bemidji State Friday evening, and again, they take them on Saturday at home as well. But yeah, I'm interested not only to call the game with you, but then to come back next week and break it down and see whether any of the things we touched upon, either were points that they took into stride and improved, or if they regressed after the tough losses to Wisconsin. As usual, we welcome your involvement in this conversation about Ohio State Buckeye athletics. Please follow us on Twitter at ChalkTalkOSU, and if you'd like to ask us a question or make an observation, we're always paying attention, so use the hashtag CTOSU, and of course Aaron will join us again next week, and we'll be talking football and of course all the things that you mentioned. And so without further ado, do you want to take us away?
Of course. I'm Kaley Rentz for Andrew Todd Smith and Aaron Yarian. Thank you and goodbye.